After Hurricane Katrina was another disaster in 2005 that I had responded to and led. And the transition there was we carried that same prayer as every person. We were teamed up with the disaster mortuary teams to recover those who were lost. And at Memorial Hospital and at the other places where those who were lost, as they were brought home, many times their families were not yet known where they were because they had been transitioned, as we are currently in this certain time of a major hurricane, that those whose families were displaced weren't going to be easily found. And so we didn't know what tradition, what background, what faith, where they were, and how we would honor them. But we would honor them with this interfaith and interdenominational honoring of giving thanks for their life. And it means something to show up. It means something to be there. After in American Samoa, there were 3 simultaneous earthquakes and that created a tsunami. And I remember being part of a delegation that we were invited to go out to that site. I believe it was 34 people who died on the island of American Samoa in one time. And the amazing thing about that is just the gift of community that exists on American Samoa is unlike anything I have ever experienced in my entire life. And their faith was unbelievably strong. A tsunami on an island is not like a tsunami that you think of hitting the mainland. A tsunami on the island wraps around the entire island. So the wave that hit the island went up 40 feet around the whole island on every part of it. So there's no safe side. And we walked with families through some of the most overwhelming moments. There's a little village called Leone that has a lone palm tree. I met one of the women whose father planted that palm tree. While we were there, I met the mother of a little girl who was 7 years old. When the tsunami hit, the wave washed through their entire home, and she held on to her daughter's hand while the wave that came through, she said that the water came through, and she held on as tight as she could until her hand slipped away, and she lost the grip of her daughter's hand, and she was sitting in front of her house. A day or two later, they had found her daughter's body, and she was just overwhelmed with this sense of how could I have let go of her hand? The sense of what could I have done differently? And I remember just sitting with her in the midst of all that, of being able to just hold her hand and spend time with her as she told her daughter's story, honoring her life and planning her funeral. And funerals in American Samoa, they usually will bury someone's body on their property. Their property is their home. It's part of their family legacy. And I remember she had these little pins made up with her daughter's image on it, and she just wanted people to remember her daughter. We were then invited to just speak to the schools and to go into some of the schools and help the children. There was a third graders and others that were just having a hard time. And they said, could you, me and a psychologist, it was just myself and a psychologist, were going to the schools and invited to help them process. And so he said, one of the best things that he used was this thing called Plan a Dream. Plan a Dream was to help the children talk about what is it that they're most overwhelmed by. And the children often said, who's going to watch the water when we go to sleep? Because we can't go to sleep if nobody's there to watch the water. Some of the children were seen with flashlights just holding it out by the water because they live along the ocean. Many folks on American Samoa live on near the ocean. Their homes had been destroyed, but they still felt that need to be close. We asked them, what is the last thing you think about before you go to sleep? And they said the tsunami. And in American Samoa, there is a curfew that happens. They actually use oxygen tanks as a bell, and they ring the oxygen tank 3 times to indicate that it's time for curfew. The curfew begins at 9 o'clock at night. They said, we hear the bell and we think of the tsunami. And so we then invited them to think of something they enjoyed. We asked them, take out a piece of paper and crayons, and they were like pizza, birthday cake, all these different things that they thought about. And I said, draw that and place it under their pillow when they go to sleep. And then before they go to sleep, we asked them to open up the picture and look at it and think about that thing, that pizza, that birthday cake, whatever it is, and then go to sleep. And I said, when you hear the ringing of the bell, it often happened after they were asleep. So they were jarred awake when the curfew started. And I said, what does it mean when you hear the bell? And they said, that means curfew happens. And I said, what does that mean for you? And they said that we have to be in our room, or we have to be in bed. But I said, does it also mean that your neighbors and your families and everyone around you in your neighborhood is also at home? And they said, yes. So I said, if you think about that, when you hear the bell, could you remember, think about that this is something that keeps you safe, that it means that everyone's home, that it's the signal not about alarm, but it is the signal of safety and comfort, that it now is translating it from something that's a warning to something that is positive. So we did this for about 3,000 children on the island over these 3 weeks. And I remember one little boy who we happened to come back the next day, and he had his hands on his hips. He was about 7 years old. He had his hands on his hips, and he said, "Mr. Red Cross." And I said, "Oh, I'm in trouble." He said, "You are in trouble." So I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "That plan a dream thing." And I said, "What? Did it work?" And he says, "No, it didn't work." And I said, "Well, what happened? What happened?" And he says, "I wanted to dream that I was Mr. Freeze so that I could freeze the tsunami in my dream." And I said, "So what did you dream about?" And he said, "I dreamt I was Superman." And I said, "Was that a bad thing?" And he said, No, but I want to be Mr. Freeze." And I said, "Well, you keep at it, and maybe tonight you'll dream about being Mr. Freeze."
Okay. I want to ask you something that you're probably not expecting me to ask, but we spoke a few weeks ago, and you said something really beautiful. You were talking about journals. Are you okay to share
Absolutely. No, absolutely. In fact, I was just recently doing a training or teaching for the Buddhist Sushi Foundation, and they're creating a disaster spiritual care program through Taiwan, and they've invited me to be their mentor and teacher on some of these topics. And so they asked me, they said, "What is the one thing that helps you process when you see and you experience all that's unfolding?" And I will say it is my journal. When I was in American Samoa, the one thing I had was an iPod Touch, and it had a notes section like it does today. And in those notes section, I began using that as my journal. But I only started it after 3 days of being on the island, and after hearing so many stories of the kids and all. What started happening was I started dreaming. All the really difficult stories that people were sharing were coming right back in my dreams. And I was like, wow, I'm really being affected by the way, I mean, it's like it's coming out of my dreams. If it doesn't come out one way, it's coming out of my dreams. And so I realized, hey, I forgot to start journaling. And when you're on a disaster response operation, every day is like 3 weeks. And it feels it's just so packed full that I realized that if I don't get it out before I go to sleep, it will come back through my dreams. And so journaling, I began personal situation report. I call it something else, but I would describe it as the good and the bad and the ugly of what you see. You just have a way of putting it outside of yourself. I describe my life like a river. When I do respond, that event, 9/11, shifted my river in a way that I never imagined it would go. And I spent 6 months trying to get the river to go back to where it was until I realized crooked rivers are beautiful too. And every time I've experienced a disaster, it's moved my river in a different direction. And there's another glowing treasure chest in each bend of those rivers. I've been able to translate that into my personal losses as well. When I've lost my father and lost my mom, to realize that I don't have to be done with my grief. And the journal helps me put a bookmark in the places that I need to intentionally go back and do the work of the trauma support to make sure that I'm keeping myself as whole as I can be in my brokenness.
I'm loving getting to know more about you and just hearing all the beauty that seems like the wrong word for disaster, but all the beauty that comes out of it, all the sacredness.
There's many holy ground moments that in the brokenness is light, and that light is healing. It's an absence of words many times, but an abundance of light and warmth.
Well, thank you for sitting down and sharing all of this.
Thank you as well.
Yeah.